All right. I am going to go ahead and get started here. So again, thank you everyone so much for joining today. We Fundraise Up, Greater Good Charities, and Delve Deeper are really excited to share with you the emergency fundraising playbook that we've put together with the goal of helping organizations regardless of size, so small or larger, to maximize results. Hopping into our agenda today, we're going to cover introductions. We're going to go through a case study of a recent disaster, the Texas flood response that Greater Good Charities had. We're going to cover best practices, how you can prepare yourself for when disaster does hit. We're going to discuss the mock run that Greater Good Charities conducted internally, which is really interesting. I'm very excited for Sydney to share these takeaways and learnings from that exercise. We have some checklists that we've put together that you can take back to your org to prepare in the best ways. And then we'll have time for a Q&A. All right, so diving in, I am Catherine Healy. I am a programmatic media lead at Delve Deeper. I'm based in New York City. Some of the recent emergencies that I've worked on include the Turkey-Syria earthquakes in 2023, the Ukraine war, and the Gaza crisis. I'm joined by Sydney Collier, who manages the advertising programs and agencies on the Greater Good Charities GGC side. These include paid social, SEM, programmatic, SMS, and affiliate marketing. Some of the recent disasters that Sydney has worked on include the Maui wildfires, Hurricanes Helene, Hurricane Milton, Palisades wildfires, and she is based in Los Angeles. We are also joined by Tara from Fundraise Up. She is a senior customer success manager who works specifically with Greater Good Charities to enable success within the platform. Previously, she spent over a decade at UNICEF USA, and then she's also spent some time on the agency side. She has firsthand experience working in response to emergencies like the Ukraine war, Haiti earthquake in 2011, and the Philippines typhoon. And she's based in Asheville, North Carolina. All right, so a little bit about Delve Deeper. So as I said, my name's Catherine. I'm a performance media lead at Delve Deeper. We're a performance media agency and really a growth engine for nonprofits. We work with nonprofits of various sizes, and we really break the law of diminishing returns by first proving our efficiency and then scaling investments. And so we're maximizing every dollar that we're spending. And this is actually a graph of the results that we've delivered. So really compounding all of the results over time, the exponential growth that we've driven across all of our clients. And I'll pass it to Sydney to talk through Greater Good Charities.
Hi, everyone, and thank you so much for joining. Greater Good Charities is a global 501c3 nonprofit. Our mission is to amplify the good for people, animals, and the environment. And we do that in a pretty wide variety of ways. We do have our own programmatic response and teams. So that includes things like flights for pets to transport them to less crowded shelters. We also provide grants and in-kind supplies and support. And our goal is to sort of fill the gaps in where the need is needed most. And disaster response is a really, really large part of what we do. And I'll kick it over to Tara to talk about Fundraise Up.
Great. Thanks, Sydney. Appreciate that. And hi, everyone. I'm excited to be here today to talk about emergency response with you all. So where does Fundraise Up come in? Well, at Fundraise Up, our mission is to unlock the world's giving potential. And our goal with emergency response is to enable real-time response to help you all, to help nonprofits get in market immediately and to drive impact. I'm excited today to introduce some tips, features, and tools that we offer to help you drive impact quickly when emergencies do strike. And I think next slide.
All right, we're going to delve into the case study, the Texas flood response.
Yeah, so just for some additional context, Greater Good Charities has worked with Fundraise Up for several years now. So we use all of their features as basically our e-commerce platform, including our response for the Texas flood response. And we work with Delve on our paid media program, specifically with programmatic and SEM. So we'll talk a lot about how we work together as teams. But for the Texas flood response, this was a bit of a unique event because it happens on the 4th of July weekend. So, everyone was, SEM is search engine management. So things like Google Ads. And we weren't sure what the public response to this was going to be, right? With it being over the 4th of July, we typically see the most response from donors when we also see a really large media response. In addition, we had a lot of people who were out of office. So despite all of that, we were able to get a lot of content out the door extremely quickly to start fundraising. So within 24 hours, we launched our landing page and our Fundraise Up elements. We posted to our organic social channels, and we started running paid social ads on Meta and Instagram. Within 48 hours, we had sent out an email with a fundraising ask, and we had contacted our major and corporate donors. And then within 72 hours, we had worked with Delve to get our search engine management and programmatic ads up, and we had sent out an SMS. Next slide. So despite the holiday weekend, our donors really responded well to this event and showed us how much they wanted to help. So our average gift size for this was $68, which is slightly higher than we typically see. 82% of our gifts were raised on Fundraise Up, which just shows the power of this platform and how heavily we rely on it as an organization. We had over 12,000 donors give to this campaign and almost 600 new recurring plans. What went wrong? There were a lot of things that ideally would have gone out more quickly. So a great example is our programmatic and SEM ads. Ideally, we also would have launched something like that within the first 24 hours. And it being a holiday weekend, the communication between the Greater Good Charities team was just a little bit slower. So we just didn't get everything into market as quickly as we liked. And later in the presentation, we'll talk a little bit about how we address that moving forward. Next slide. So some proven strategies that you can use. I want to kind of take a step back and talk about how our organization prepares for disasters as a whole. So, most of us are probably marketers, I'm assuming, but we rely really heavily on our programs teams to actually deploy the services and the aid and whatever it is that we're offering. So the marketing team is in very close contact with our programs teams. And they work extremely hard to pre-position aid in areas that are disaster prone, so that if a disaster happens, we can get that aid to the people that need it as quickly as possible. Next slide. On the marketing side, we take this communications with our programs team, and we consistently talk about that with our donors. So we're not only talking about disasters when there's an active disaster. We're keeping them updated on our response before our long-lasting response, even after it's sort of faded out of the media. And that's really important because when you make a ask to your donor, you don't want them to be surprised. Or you don't want them to ask, is this legitimate? Why your organization? You want to be able to show them the proof that you are a tried and true organization and you are dedicated to helping the people that need it. So we talk to our donors before and after disasters. one point that we're going to talk about a lot is the importance of templates. So the way that we are able to get ads and emails and everything out so quickly is because we rely on templates. We're not starting from scratch with our copy and our images, etc. We're putting together the bones of those templates, and then obviously we're going in and we're tweaking them to ensure that all of the information for a specific disaster response is as accurate as possible. And then we also assign point people and backups, right? So Texas flood is a great example because I myself was on vacation. And so we wanted to make sure that we have not only like the primary person responsible for something, but backups, because, you know, people should be able to go on vacation. They might be a little bit slower to respond if it's like a weekend or a holiday. And we want to make sure that we're still able to fundraise while being, you know, gracious of people's time. Next slide.
Great. So how is GGC Greater Good using Fundraise Up specifically? And, you know, these stats are actually covering Greater Good's emergency response overall, not just to the Texas floods. And these are a couple of the features and tools that they've been utilizing. So adaptive cost coverage. This is one, it's an AI based feature. It's a tool that decides whether or not to pre-select or not the box for donors to cover fees. It takes into account nearly 100 data points, including the value of the donation overall. Greater Good has seen that 82% of the donation fees are covered utilizing the adaptive cost coverage. AI defaulted frequency. This is another AI focused tool. It again brings in these same 100 data points to decide whether or not to default the form to monthly or one time. And so utilizing that tool actually has resulted in more monthly, 140%, 44% more recurring gifts, even when compared to using the monthly default. So this is absolutely one of the features and tools I consistently recommend to customers to consider for emergency response and otherwise. The homepage pop-up, this is one of our elements. It's a really easy to use tool. You don't need a developer or a technical person to get up like a homepage modal or a donation pop-up call out immediately. You can use one of our elements. It's easy to use. You can get them up quickly and easily, linked to your specific campaigns. So they saw 985 gifts come in through the pop-up. And then impact description. So this is a specific layout for the checkout donation form checkout option that gives you the ability to highlight what the impact of a specific gift would be. What's the impact of $50 versus $100 versus $150? You can customize that to your emergency. I'd recommend updating those impact descriptions regularly as a emergency plays out and as you get more information and data coming in. And then we'll get to a little bit later on in the presentation some more features that Fundraise Up offers to enable quick emergency response. Next slide, please.
So we want to talk a little bit about a really unique scenario that the Greater Good Charities team set up. And this was after our Texas flood response because we just identified some things that we wanted to improve on. So we basically set up a mock disaster. And everyone allocated 4 hours of time on their calendars that was solely dedicated to this. We didn't have any calls set up. We were only focusing on this disaster run. And our leadership team essentially created a fake disaster. And they were very detailed with it. They had, fake news articles. They had our programs team send in fake videos. You can see the screenshot here sort of shows the base disaster type. So we were supposed to be fundraising for a fake wildfire. And the goal was to set up a high pressure environment to see what we were doing really well, what content we were able to get out and how quickly we were able to create it, but also to identify any holes and areas for improvement. Next slide. So what went well with this mock disaster? We published probably the most amount of content we had fake published ever. Obviously we kept everything in drafts. We didn't actually post anything, but we had multiple social posts. We deployed ads on multiple platforms, several emails. The communication between our team was really, really wonderful. We had a dedicated Teams chat set up for this disaster. And it just showed that our templates really do work. What could be improved? We did identify the need for additional templates. So up until this point, we had basically set up templates for like our most basic disaster response messaging. And we had broken that out by what we call disaster type, right? Is it a hurricane? Is it a tornado? Is it a wildfire? And our templates sort of just said something along the lines of like Greater Good Charities is deploying aid for this disaster. Help us get that aid to the people and pets that need it most. But a lot of the times, donors do respond well to specific details, and they might find a specific area of that campaign really compelling. So we wanted to create templates that were still, vague enough and general enough that they could easily be tweaked and added details, but just spoke a little bit more to the specific things that we often provide during disasters. So for example, a lot of the times during disasters, pets become lost, displaced, injured, and they're needed to be taken into shelters. But if those shelters obviously have pets in them, before this disaster, it can really quickly become overcrowded, and those shelters need as much support as they can get. So we'll conduct flights to transport pets that were in the shelters before the disaster to less crowded areas. And we might, have almost a mini campaign within a campaign talking about the flight specifically. So we decided that we needed to set up some of those additional templates. We also identified a lot of areas for cross-functional training. You might have one person on your team who's an expert in something, but if that person is just completely unavailable that day, you need to make sure that other people are trained up on things, so that you're not spending your time figuring things out. Next slide. We're going to talk a little bit about some great takeaways and ways that your team can put this into action. So I'm going to pass it off to Catherine.
Yeah, I'll take us off on the paid media side. So we talked about what to do from the organizational side quite a bit. And so we'll talk a little bit more now about what you can do with, your agency partners, also recognizing that different organizations, this looks different, right? Some might have an agency partner, some might be operating in-house. So regardless, these steps that can be taken are applicable for regardless of what the size of the organization is. So one of those things ultimately comes down to communication. So who is the point person, for when an emergency strikes? Who's communicating with who? What does that process look like? And which is why I found the mock run that GGC did so interesting, because you're able to see, okay, is it taking a really long time to get copy or imagery approved? And obviously presetting the templates and having all of these conversations when it's not an emergency is the best thing that you can do to prepare, right? So you have your pre-approved templates, your pre-approved images. Are you using stock images? If not, and you're going to be receiving images, who are you going to be receiving those images from? Do you have a timeline set up, for an ideal timeline of when you want to receive those images? So then you can continue your communication with all of the other teams, and people within the organization to ultimately deploy your paid media ads. So more specifically on the search, social, and programmatic channels, we want to have templates approved, copy, imagery. One other thing that we can do on the programmatic display side from an audience perspective is we can create custom audiences. And so this is something that is available and looks a little bit different depending on the platform that you're using, but essentially it's an audience that's built based on custom inputs. So you can put in these keywords, earthquakes, Texas floods, and, have a variety of keywords related to that specific disaster so that your ads are able to align contextually with content. So, someone might be reading the news and then, CBS News, an ad pops up and they're like, oh, wow, I'm reading this news about this Texas flood disaster and I'm able to make an impact. I see where I can make an impact immediately, right? So super relevant there. One other thing is aligning on budget. So how much, can we spend? Because as we all know, we need to act fast. Speed to market is really important. Most of the revenue is driven in, very, very short time frame, which is why ironing out all of these kind of gaps and processes beforehand is really beneficial in maximizing your overall results and donation volume and revenue garnered. What landing pages are you going to send traffic to? And I will pass it to Tara to speak to the Fundraise Up side.
Great. Thanks, Catherine. So this is a checklist of sort of online donation form readiness, whether that's Fundraise Up or otherwise. I want to give a +1 to some stuff that Sydney and Catherine have pointed out, which is just having conversations early with folks about getting some of these resources pre-positioned ahead of time. I point out here that we recommend building a reusable campaign or donation template with images and videos ready to share. In my experience, some of the hardest resources to get in the first hours after an emergency are imagery and copy that is relevant and approved as it relates to the disaster in question. So have the discussions ahead of time with your team internally about what you're comfortable sharing and putting in market. Are you comfortable using stock imagery when you first go in market or not? What level of copy specificity are you comfortable putting in market? I think those are really important conversations to have because the faster you get in market, the more impact you can make quickly. I would say when you're building reusable campaigns and donation templates, do it by emergency type because how you respond to a fire is very different than how you respond to an earthquake. And in particular, those kinds of disasters that strike with no notice, again, like earthquakes and fires, I would have each of these different types of emergencies have their own template that you're ready to pre-position and then put in market. We recommend utilizing features like goal meters, considering if you want to have gifts matched or not. Those are important things to decide ahead of time. I definitely would link those to Fundraise Up elements ahead of time, right? So some of these elements we'll talk you through. These are the reusable, easy to make widgets that allows you to sort of infuse Fundraise Up donation tools throughout your website. Make the campaigns and then link them to the elements ahead of time. Some of the elements that we think are particularly useful in emergency response are the sticky buttons, which are sort of a reminder to the donor to consider making a donation. Make sure those are visible. Another element that we find is particularly effective at boosting conversion rates is the social proof element. So this is an element that highlights, it can highlight names or it can be anonymous, but it highlights recent donations that have been made to the charity in question. There's some psychological impact that we find that helps influence people making gifts. And again, drive as much attention as you can to your donation forms. Always optimize for donor experience. I think these are best practices in general. You want to enable a variety of payment methods. You always want to meet the donor where they're at. Even enabling payment methods that are less utilized, they actually drive conversion rates up overall. So sometimes even if you're thinking, do we want to enable a Venmo or a Google checkout? Like we find that the more payment methods you have enabled, the more it drives your conversion rate up overall. We recommend using suggested donation amounts. Again, this is using RI-based tools. It decides what donation amounts to present to various donors, and it's personalized. So those amounts are personalized to them. Definitely make sure you're using things like the reminder and abandoned donation elements. People get busy in their lives and they start a donation and they might not be able to complete it at that, right at that moment. So make sure those are pre-set up. And then just in general, I would say, make sure that your platform is reliable. Can it handle donation spikes in donation, spikes in traffic? At UNICEF, the highest traffic volumes we ever experienced were during emergency response time. So you want to make sure that you have a platform that you can trust and that can handle those spikes in traffic when you have them. Next slide.
Last, we just want to reiterate some of the readiness tactics for your team. A lot of this we've already discussed, right? Like pre-preparing your assets and templates, assigning point people for each channel. To me, developing a timeline is one of the most important parts of this, right? Like, what does your organization consider the quote unquote most important things to be going live with? So for us, we have to have a landing page, right? You can't fundraise without that. We have to have our Fundraise Up elements because that's the mechanism in which people are completing their donation. So that's always going to be like the number one thing that we get live. We've also, as a team, decided that an organic social post is the first thing that we want up, just because we want something that's super public, most of the time just announcing that we are deploying aid to a specific area or response. Within 24 hours, we'd like to have our first email and SMS blast out. Our major donors have been contacted, and we'll have our ads live. Within 48 hours, we'll have a second organic social post live. And this is typically where we start to get into some of our more specifics, right? A lot of the times our initial response is sort of just letting donors know that we are responding, we're assessing the need. A lot of the times partners sort of need to get their bearings around them and figure out what exactly that need is. And we try to be really, really conscious as an organization about the aid that we're deploying because we want it to be truly helpful, right? We don't want to create more waste or overwhelm people. We want to be a partner that is reliable and consistent. So that 48 to 72 hour window is when we start to get more specific with our messaging. And we're saying, okay, we've been in contact from partners from the beginning. They've told us there is a need and we are going to deploy aid. But we're starting to hear that this is the response that we're actually going to have. And we need your help as a donor to make that happen. 72 hour mark is also when we'll start to give some updates, right? The majority of the time we're deploying a team in the field to respond to these disasters, which means that they're able to capture like photos and videos and assets for us to use. And they're starting to, give us an idea of what it's like in the field, right? Like, what aid have we given out so far? What are some stories from people? What are they requesting? And so it's really important to continue to update your donors with that response. And that might not always be a second fundraising ask. It might just be a thank you so much for your donation. Like, this is what we've been able to accomplish thanks to your support. And then, of course, test and refine. This is really important. I think disasters can often be so hectic and crazy that after it's done, people are burned out. Like, we literally have to take time off because people are working such long hours during our disaster response. So obviously make sure people have the time that they need to, regroup and take some time off. But after that, you don't want to just file that away in the back of your head to never be thought about again. You want to ensure that you're talking with your team about what went well and what you thought could be improved. If you have reporting templates or reports that you're using to identify the success of a campaign, make sure that you're going back and reviewing those before the next disaster happens. And then just communicating proactively, again, like talk to your donors about your response, even when it's not an active disaster, and keep your messaging really clear and actionable. People want to know what it is exactly that you're doing and how you're doing it. So if you can sort of get down that like 1 to 3 sentences on your response, you're going to have a much better outcome with your donors.
Thank you so much, Sydney. I think it's also really helpful to sharing these timelines with all partners, just because then everybody is rowing in the same direction, and their expectations are really clear. And then on your note, in reference to cross training, like people within the organization, this is something that we do at Delve as well. So we have our account specific media folks who work on this account on a regular basis. And to your point, sometimes things happen, somebody is on PTO, but because we have these processes and this cross training, anybody is able to very easily hop in and they know exactly what to do. And also that methodology is consistent, right? Like it's the same, they're making the same kind of changes and implementations that the person who works on this account every day would make. So I think it's really important to be internally aligned in that regard as well. Another thing that I was thinking of too is if this applies to those organizations that have people working in different time zones, you can definitely use that to your advantage. Most oftentimes we have our folks that are working in the EU. They're the ones that are seeing the disasters first, and I like really flagging internally because they're reading the news at 4 or 5 a.m. East Coast time. And so that also helps us use the time advantage, the time difference to our advantage. And then we also have Google Trends and AI alerts that are enabled with specific keywords that just help us track this very proactively. But thank you very much, everyone, for your time. And we are happy to answer any questions that anybody has.
There's one question in the questions chat that we can answer right now. And if anyone else has them, feel free to put them in that chat. What tips do you have for setting up a team that can respond quickly, even if an emergency hits on a weekend or holiday? So for me, I think it's really important to communicate expectations to your team. Obviously, no one wants to work on a weekend. Unfortunately, the reality is, like at Greater Good Charities, disasters do not have a timeline, right? Like they are going to happen during the weekend. So we just communicate out to our team that the expectation is that they're able to help in any way they can. Now, that doesn't mean that they're expected to work an 8-hour day on a Saturday, right? That's sort of the power of the templates. Like sometimes I'll literally come on and it's an hour of work to get something up. But you don't want to make your team feel like they had no idea what their expectations were. In terms of holidays, we try really, really hard to give people their vacation time. And so we definitely assign point people. If those point people aren't available because they're like on vacation, not everyone is on an active vacation during a holiday. Obviously, like everyone would love to take that time off. But if someone's like actively traveling compared to someone who is just sort of having an off day, we'll try to like just be really respectful of people's time and reach out to someone who maybe has a little bit more time than others.
I might just add one or two things there, which is that we used to have a process at UNICEF. There was a group called Emergency Response Team. And so, across the organization, there were various people who had sort of emergency related responsibilities. And those responsibilities and expectations were identified ahead of time. And we had emergencies and just in general, like current events categorized. So it might be categorized as we're monitoring this situation. And then if something escalates, it, might elevate to, we're going active and in market. For those scenarios in which, a surprise emergency happens and it's not expected on a Saturday, we usually had, people's phone numbers, identified in like a sheet ahead of time. And so if a large scale emergency happened, we would, text people and basically say, this is a scenario where we're coming online and we're going in market right away. So I would say establish, the who and those protocols ahead of time.
Yeah, on the agency side, we definitely have a combination of both. So certainly important to set expectations so everyone knows their role, and also have like a similar process to monitoring. Like a lot of the times we'll monitor internally and have this internal dialogue, like, is it going to escalate? Not sure. We're monitoring the trends, like what are we seeing in search? Not quite yet there, but it could be. So, very actively watching that just so we are ready. And again, all of the processes, all of these conversations have already happened with the organizations in advance. So we really have our plan and we're ready to hit the ground running. All right, next question. If a nonprofit can only start with one channel, we mentioned social search and email, in the first 24 hours, which would you prioritize and why? Sydney, do you have a POV on that?
Yeah, I can take that. So I think there's two main questions that you should ask yourself for this question. The first being, what is your number one goal? I'm assuming for most nonprofits, the answer to that is fundraising, right? If you're deploying aid and responding to a disaster, you need to have the cash inflow to support that. But maybe it's not. Maybe you just want to make your donors aware of the fact that you are responding and you're trying to set yourself up as an organization who is seen as the go-to organization for disaster response. So sort of ask yourself what the goal is with that very first post. The second question is, what channel do you see the most success in? Maybe you have a really successful tried and true email program and you're still building up your ads programs, but they're not quite there yet. Maybe you make the majority of revenue on ads compared to email. So use the channel that you have the most success in and that you feel the most competent in and prioritize that.
And also looking at your overall strategy too, right? Like what's the role of search in your strategy? You want to capture that intent. So make sure that you're leveraging these relevant keywords. And then if you have social and programmatic in the mix as well, thinking about what are the opportunities, like I had mentioned, specifically on the programmatic side, we have these custom intent audiences that we can build. We have contextual audiences, so they're able to, align pretty specifically based on our custom inputs. And this is, via keywords, URLs, apps. So in this case, mostly relevant to URLs and keywords, especially. And so, making sure that you're leveraging that, and then also aligning your interest-based audience as well on the social side. What kinds of visuals or messaging have you found resonate most with donors during emergency appeals?
I can start with this. So we typically at Greater Good Charities will start with stock imagery. And there's a wide variety of reasons for that, including the fact that, we do deploy teams in the field, but we have to wait for them to get there to send us imagery. There's also a lot of advertising and legal disclaimers to using things like AP photos of disasters. You typically can't use that to raise money. You can only use that to build awareness. So we'll start with stock imagery, and then the second that our field team sends us images, we'll swap those things out or include that in the second round of emails and organic social posts, to make sure that we're capturing the active disaster response for that event. In terms of what actually resonates most with our donors, action shots, right? Something that shows a person or an animal or whatever it is actively in need. The caveat being that we never want to like take advantage of people, right? I'm not talking someone who's like drowning in a flood and needs help. I'm saying like someone at an event who's receiving aid at one of our distributions, or images of sort of like after an event has happened. If there's just images that like show the destruction and the need, I know that can get like a little funky. So we are really, really cognizant of like being overly sensitive and as respectful to people as possible. But you also want to be able to show your donors why this need is so necessary.
I would say that the organizations that have guardrails for, what they want to say, from a copy perspective, from an imagery perspective, that's also helpful. Just because then, when we're deciding what to put in market, it's okay, can we put this in? According to this, we can. And I think that kind of helps, speed things along. And overall, from a resonation perspective, like relevance is what we found to be, what resonates the most, right? And so thinking about how people are reading these articles, and there are trucks blocked, in Gaza, and they're unable to bring in aid, and then we have these ads in market that are showing this, and it's almost like in some cases that people are getting their news essentially from the ads, right? If they haven't seen this, because we're so quick to market, and those have really performed well.
I think that's everything.
All right. Well, thank you everyone so much for your time.
Thank you, everyone. We really appreciate it. Hope
Thank
everyone has a great day.